We all learn these things in different languages, so I want to just talk pure geometry for a moment. We start with the unconscious sphere. And the sphere is this wonderful paradox in geometry because it is simultaneously the most yin and the most yang, the most complex and the most simple. Because you can build a sphere using computer mathematics with an infinite number of planes, it's limited to the chip in the computer, or an infinite number of dots, again, limited to chip power in the computer. And in that way, it is the fullest extent of masculinity, the dot, the particle, the line. But it's also, and in that way, it is the most complex system imaginable. But it is simultaneously one. It is the simplest. It is just one. It is a completely symmetrical sphere. It is a self-contained system. And the sphere starts out, because it's so complex, it starts out in the simple frame. It's just one. It starts out feminine. In order to deepen our understanding of the system of that sphere, we start with a triangle. We break the sphere into three distinctions. Now we have three words, and it's more complex, but it's also vastly simpler than the masculine expression of the sphere, which is an infinite number of dots and straight lines. We now have a three-point system, heart, mind, and body. It's very similar to the crude set of systems we had when we had earth, air, fire, and water. In fact, heart, mind, and body are on an infinite cycle where the feelings affect the body, the thoughts affect the feelings, the thoughts affect the body, the thoughts affect the behavior, which affects the sensations, which behave. It's an endless continuum, but it's better than nothing. We then move into a four-point system, and we contain a little bit more, a little bit more complexity. We move into a 5-point system. We move into a 10-point system, a 20-point system. So we're starting off with the simplicity of one. We're making it more and more complex. And what geometry allows us to do is see where we get asymmetrical, because our grace comes. The reason cars have wheels rather than triangles and fours and five-sided stars is because there's more grace, there's more efficiency in a circle and a sphere than in any other shape. So we make the sphere more and more and more complex without losing track. So we're limited to our own computing power. And the sphere provides a framework to see, are we developing all the complexity in just one side of the sphere? Are we developing all the complexity, or we're learning all about the complexity of this one culture, but we don't know anything? The typical chauvinism of, we're the sophisticated Westerners and they're just Indians, right? They're just savages. We know nothing about them. They're different than us, and so we have a very crude model. We can't begin to appreciate the superiority of a Native American culture until maybe today we do an analysis of intelligence, and we say that the typical American is going to die leaving 102 metric tons in a landfill. The typical Native American died without a single pound of non-biodegradable waste. Typical American is enemies with most of its environment, with very clear preference. I like that, I don't like. The Native American, everything was sacred and interconnected. So when you start going outside the set of your cult, who has the most sacredness in their world? The Native Americans. Who left the least amount of waste? The Native Americans. Who had the most sustainable planet with their lifestyle? The Native Americans. So you start to realize, wow, they're superior in all these areas that my cult doesn't pay attention to. but they're inferior in all of these ways that my cult does pay attention to. Their bows and arrows were no match for a rifle. We were better at killing, whether it was buffalo or Native Americans, than they were. They were better at preserving the planet. Which trait is most needed today? And so if you play around with paradox, up becomes down, right becomes wrong. It's a more sophisticated and holistic model of thinking, because the context is understanding that if you go too far in any one direction, you end up becoming one with its opposite. And so the sphere, as it gets more and more complex, it also gets more graceful. You think of a bicycle wheel. If there was just one spoke on a bicycle wheel, it would have to be a very thick metal spoke to hold the whole wheel. And they do build those bicycles, but they're more expensive. It's just done for aesthetics. The most elegant bicycle wheel has lots of thin spokes. You use less steel, less metal, and have more balance and structural support. And so moving through the geometry of your system and consciously, as you edit your system, adding something on the left side to the right side, in mathematics and in geometry, you get more and more grace as you reclaim the circle, coming back to the place where you began, where it was just one and simple. And it is now, as it returns to its spherical shape with 5,000 dots, it is more complex, more resilient, more efficient, more intelligent than just the triangle.